All right, we're going to get started in a minute and welcome Mark and Dragos back to the main stage to go over a Fireside chat on the TAO User Group and some more details on the roadmap committee.
All right, thank you, Ashley. So I'm joined now by Dragos Ivan, product manager at OAT. Hi, Dragos.
Hi, Mark, and hi, everyone. It's really exciting to be here. It's exciting times right now.
Yes, and so we want to shed a bit more light on the roadmap activities here that we have in store with the TAO User Group. So Ashley, could you just click forward to the next slide? Oh, nice looking. Thank you. So here's the activity calendar that I presented at the end of the previous session. And so I asked Dragos to join us and talk a bit in more detail exactly how we're going to do that, because obviously we're asking or hoping that many of you will join us for these workshops, and so we're asking for you to dedicate time to it. And so I think it's important that we also explain to you exactly how the process works. And so Dragos, from epics to stories, how are we going to do that?
Yeah, so I was thinking that maybe it would be nice also to go through a bit of glossary, right, explaining some of the terms, because people involved in software development might be familiar probably with what epics and stories and roadmap mean, but other people might not. So just as a general note, the roadmap is basically a visual representation of your strategic plans as a company developing a product. And then the stories are short bodies of work, short requirements or requests that usually are written from the perspective of a user. They were concepts coming from agile methodologies, from Scrum. You might have heard about user story. That's why they are called user story. They explain a need from the perspective of a user. While epics are typically larger, so they are bigger initiatives that typically can be broken down into smaller tasks. So with that note aside on what are the epics, the stories, and the roadmap, how do we get from those epics to actionable stories? Well, since I mentioned that the roadmap is a representation of the strategic plan, so the roadmap is not necessarily only an enumeration or a backlog of features. That's not all there is to a roadmap. There are multiple different things that we need to consider that are related to the strategy of the product. There might be things that are less visible maybe to an end user, and Mark, you gave some really good examples in the earlier presentation about those under the hood improvements that maybe are not written or are not described from a user perspective, but are equally important to the product. So just to get back to the original question, our approach, what we have in mind is to start indeed from an already curated list of product features. So we already have the so-called wish list that you, Mark, already talked about, and we want to enrich that with additional functionalities and with additional improvements that come either as product features or architectural improvements, and they are coming from market research. But what we really hope through this crowdsourcing effort that we call the TAO User Group. So it should come from TAO users in the end. I mean, who best can express their needs if not TAO user? So we plan to start having those discussions after we gather those needs from other TAO users. We want to consolidate all of those needs and then start discussions with TAO users so that we can refine those requirements. Maybe we find some similarities between multiple requirements and we can define a common approach on how best to implement them, involve other stakeholders as well, external to OAT or internal. We can get input from UX, from business analysts, from architects, as well as subject matter experts or just regular TAO users. And then with all that feedback, we plan to reach that goal of having some well-defined stories that will then become actionable as well in terms of implementing them. So yeah, not really a short answer, but that's our road, how we envision it to go from epics to stories.
Yes, and so we want to do that starting next month. So we will send out meeting dates where we're going to organize these workshops, and of course, July, August are vacation holidays, so some people may not be available for a particular session. So how will we share it and disseminate information? How will we document the outcome of these sessions?
Yeah, well, I think that having those months, those July and August months, which are typically indeed vacation months, is actually beneficial because we can then use those months to actually gather feedback, less than maybe do those active sessions to go into more details, and then focus on the second part. So end of August, September, for those meetings where we go more into detail. And of course, we will also announce exactly what will be the approach, how we will expose that information to TAO users. We have some ideas in mind. For instance, we can use our own tools that we are using internally, such as Jira or Confluence, to document those epics and expose those to the TAO user group, so that we can we can collaborate and we can stimulate comments and questions and just collaborative work on defining those stories.
Great. And so once the stories have been defined, then the next step comes in. So estimations. And that is something I believe we're more going to do at the business analyst level or perhaps engineering level. How can you share with us, like, how do we go about estimating the effort for a particular story or feature?
Yeah, well, estimations is typically a word that sends chills to the spine for people involved in software development, for software engineers, for project managers, because in software development, probably estimation is one of the hardest problems. I recently saw a quote on I think on Twitter. Someone was saying that if you ask software developer to implement something in 5 hours, a task in 5 hours, they will let you know that they need 50 hours once they have used up 10 hours. So, and it's not the software developer's fault in any way in that matter. It's just that software projects are really complex, are really creative. You might not think of them as being creative, but they are really creative. There are no two identical projects. There are different uncertainties. So there is a challenge, right, on how do you estimate. And because of those challenges and because of that uncertainty, we do need to somehow balance the time that we spend for doing the estimations with the value and the precision we get out of it. And in order to have that balance, what we plan to use is, and we are using that also internally at the moment, is to use a lean process that allows using the right people for the job. So don't involve all the company, all the software developers, all the roles in a specific topic if they are not really needed for that specific topic. For instance, I don't know, if we are talking about a major change in usability, then it makes sense to involve a UX specialist together maybe with a UI designer. Then if we are talking about those architectural changes that you mentioned earlier, those under the hood changes, then it might make sense to involve an architect or a software engineer. So this is part of that lean process. And also, again, people involved in software development might already know that, but giving precise estimation is something that is not really so easily achievable. That's why it's called estimation, and it's typically not precise. And in a way, we need to embrace that, right? I mean, we know that estimations are not precise, then why expect them to be precise? So that's why we are also using another concept, which is providing a range of estimation. And we call that t-shirt size estimation. So instead of saying, I don't know, improving authoring will take 52 days, we will just provide a range between, I don't know, 40 and 60 days, for instance. And that provides an easier way to estimate, but also it will allow us in the future to adjust it and refine it continuously. So this is again a concept that is probably coming from agile methodologies, the fact that the initial estimate is continuously refined during an implementation. So that's one of the concepts that we are still bringing along, and it's something that we also learned ourselves during all those years developing TAO.
And so then we have estimations, meaning we have the wish list that we worked on with all the stories, estimations for all of these stories, but it's still a bit of a hodgepodge of stuff, right? So ultimately we want to get to a point where we can start building features. And so, but it's still some ways to go until we get to a build feature and a feature that gets released with the product. So can you share a bit about that part of the process?
Yeah, of course. But I mean, having the estimation is indeed just a step. It's a step towards having a better view on how the roadmap might look like. And there are very different ways of how you can actually reach defining a roadmap. There are various ways of prioritizing things. One of those ways is involving directly the estimation, and it's called value versus cost, or impact versus effort. So what will be the impact, the measured impact against the measured cost, so the estimate. And if you have a big ratio there, then it might mean that should get a higher priority, should be higher on the list in the roadmap. But then there are other things as well. So imagine that, okay, we have a new feature that is top of the roadmap. Isn't there a way of actually accelerating the time to market for that feature if it can be split in different milestones? And that's typically also something that can be done. So typically you can have different milestones, and you can have an MVP, so minimum viable product, available sooner. And then you can also validate your ideas, validate on the market that the feature that you have just released is actually used, and maybe you learn something new, and then you iterate and you launch a new milestone. So defining that roadmap is not only putting those features in an order of their priority, but also identifying dependencies, maybe defining milestones, like defining first an MVP, defining the scope of that MVP, what comes next. All of those things are included there. So yeah, it's not an easy process. It's definitely a rewarding process as soon as you see those features used by the users. And there are definitely a lot of different ways of doing it, and different ways of prioritizing those roadmap items.
Yes, and one thing that we had discussed was once we have all the stories and the estimations, if we put it all out for a vote to get to determine priorities or to bring some order into this, and be interesting here to get feedback actually from our attendees. If you have any experience in this area, working in other open source communities, like how do you really go about prioritizing? Because one approach would be to say, okay, we have the roadmap committee and it has enough diversity. There's, I don't know, 7 or 9 people on it. And then this group sets priorities. Another approach would be to say, we're going to let all users vote on it. And then the features with the highest votes are logically the ones that are candidates for development. And so I think we're at a point now where we can also open this up for our audience to ask questions. So here's my question to the audience. If you have any experience or any opinion on how to set such development priorities. Or if you have another question not related to this, please feel free to ask.
I see one question in the Q&A, Mark, from Sarah. It's what are the possibilities that TAO offers until now in the domain of psychometrics, and in which version, core or other? And the same question goes for reporting. Sarah Bohazama.
All right.
Yeah, so that's really a question that is tied with having a roadmap, right? Because there is so much that you can do on that domain right now, and we know that there is so much that we can add to TAO right now, that this will be a good fit for introducing in that TAO user group that we are just discussing as a topic of expanding the capabilities. In terms of what we can do right now, I know that typically our users right now are using some external tools for psychometrics, and we are consolidating the information from those psychometric tools into TAO. And we have tools like metadata and search that are able to make use of those results coming from psychometry. So this is one of the way that we are using psychometry in TAO. There are other really exciting ways that we plan to use that in TAO, and actually I will be presenting some exciting news tomorrow about TAO Classroom and one way of using psychometry more extensively in TAO. So looking forward to see you there tomorrow on that slot, and you will learn new ways. I don't want to spill the beans, all the beans right now on that. Yeah, so I see a comment also from Jean-Philippe that some projects are already explored and relevant, and some other solutions are not perfect. So one type of project can be easily estimated, while on the other side, other projects that are new and innovative are really risky. And yeah, I fully agree. I mean, it's what I also said about the process of estimation, right? Being risky, being full of uncertainties. It's a creative process after all. There are risks behind. That's why one of the strategies that we can use moving forward is that iterative approach through which we validate on the market that certain solutions make sense. I mean, we don't want to spend 1 year in developing something just to find out after 1 year that is not exactly what we hoped for. So then it's really useful to have those milestones and have an MVP, iterate over it, improve it, and so on, instead of just waiting for the whole bulk of a functionality to be implemented. And I also see another comment from Rafael, where he's expressing some concerns with reliability for maybe using an MVP or using those which are called hybrid of a product necessity and an MVP. So there are also some risks there, indeed. I mean, one of the risks is that you get an MVP out and then you don't spend any more time on it. But you need to question, why would that happen? So one reason why that would happen is that the MVP itself was not successful, and then maybe it makes sense to stop it. But even then, it's better that you do that earlier rather than later, or that you have a shift in priorities, which is also, it's also okay. I mean, you can have a shift in priorities. Things might become more important than others, and then it's also okay to go to those things that are more important for the market, more important for the users. So it's all about taking decisions as fast as possible and with as much as data as you can in order to be successful.
Yes, and I think in order to mitigate that risk that Raphael and Jean-Philippe are talking about, is to do what Georgi was just writing a bit earlier. You know, you need to have a destination, and like Raphael says, it's got to be a product. It's got to be. It needs a direction, and it needs to have a purpose. And if we agree on that, I think that already removes a lot of the risk. And so I think in advancing the TAO roadmap, we have a really solid foundation to start with, because it's already mature and proven, but we want to make it even better for the next 10 years. And so there's a lot of things, great things that we can do, and by building out that system. And that's what we're going to be working on with the roadmap committee here.
Indeed, and as I said earlier, it's not only about features. So it's also about the strategy and the vision of the product. So that roadmap is aligned, should be aligned with that strategy and that vision. And if this is true, then that's one more reason for it to be successful.
Yeah, exactly. And so tomorrow we'll be spending more time on the product vision. And I want to say it's not a product vision, but probably multiple visions, because the assessment lifecycle has many different needs. From authoring, item banking, test running, analytics, proctoring, and all of these are applications in their own right. And so we're going to touch on all of these areas tomorrow, and yeah, I really look forward to that. All right, Ashley. So I think we're done with this session. What's coming next?
Yep, perfect. So thank you, Mark and Dragos. Next, we go into our closing remarks. So Mark, if you'd like, we can kind of just jump right into those, or we can take a quick break, whichever you prefer.
No, I think we should carry on and then finish, and then wrap up the first day.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you again, Dragos. We look forward to hearing from you some more tomorrow. So yeah, just to recap from today, I think there have been some really insightful sessions, especially hearing from a little bit of the origins of how kind of TAO came into being and how the user group now just became initiated, and also hearing from Clyde from the Linux Foundation. So Mark, I guess kind of jumping back over to you, what were some of your highlights from this morning? And I guess what were some of the key takeaways that were really insightful to you?
Yeah, I think we touched on a couple of things. So standards certification is one that is really important, because we see it in the solutions that we deploy with our customers. And we are dealing with mission critical systems. And so in order to have all these components work well together, interoperability is really key. And the way to achieve interoperability is by enforcing the use of industry standards. So I think that is one key takeaway for our audience. Another one is perhaps more self-reflecting based on what Clyde said, what I focus on with the community. I think the way Clyde said it is the project that is you. So it is you by working with others to advance the project or the product. That is what makes a successful open source solution or offering. And so, of course, that takes commitment, right? And the desire to make a difference and have an impact. And so we all want the TAO open source community to grow and be successful. And so for self-reflection would be, okay, what can I or what could my organization do to continue or to get involved and continue moving it forward?
Yeah, I think also kind of looking back at some of the comments in the chat just throughout the day, We also had a comment from Georgie just in regards to the last roadmap session on kind of some feedback for following the cadence of the calendar for the roadmap. It's also about inspire, motivating, and shift. So I think that was also some good perspective. Because from our perspective specifically, we want to make sure that what we're putting out there is inspiring to the TAO users, and especially seeing so many community members here today. I think seeing now how we're kind of offering that shift from being just a community member and contributing in the forums to now actually having the opportunity to be more of an active participant in what we bring to the roadmap. Mark, as you were saying earlier, if we decide to incorporate voting for just kind of higher priority projects, that there's a stronger focus for community members to bring forward. But yeah, I think it's really at the end of the day all about bringing together that sense of how we can contribute to the greater good for education and make sure we're putting the right tools out there.
Yeah, exactly.